Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the C52 repair on the AW11. If you haven't watched the first episode, I'll link to it below. You're going to want to check that out because we pull the transmission out of the car and separate it between the main case and the bell housing, which is the wrong way to do it. This shot here gives you a better idea of what the reverse idler arm looks like. We'll take a look at this later in the video and we'll see why it causes so many problems upon disassembly. Alright guys, so here's the major extent of the damage. You can see these little ridges in the ring gear on the differential. So what I'm thinking happened, transmission case broke, big piece came off, went down into the bottom of the case. Transmission said, alright, that's fine. Differential was like, great, I'm gonna eat that shit for lunch. So just chewed it up. This is where we got all our shavings from. That's where we got all the debris, the metal and the oil, all that stuff. This is it. The good thing about this, now I am not a differential expert. I am not a manual transmission expert. I'm just gonna say, from my experience working with mechanical things, I'm gonna reuse this. I think this is gonna be just fine. There's still plenty of surface area. The 4AGE makes 100 horsepower at best. We are gonna slap this thing back together after cleaning out the case, and I think we're just gonna be just all right. Let's pick it on up, take a look at some of the survey the damage here. I put this one back on the bench here. There was some stuff in there. So, you know what? It's interesting because I look at this and it's important to remember that this is just transmission case. It's not gears, it's not synchros, it's just case. And then it's really, really soft. The steel gears just ripped it right apart. So I think we're going to be all right. I'm going to do the same draining on the other half of the case. And we'll see what comes out of that one. There we go. Perfect. Perfect. This is the bell housing side of the case, back up on the bench. I haven't cleaned anything out at this point, but you can definitely see towards the top of the case, which is actually the bottom when it's sitting in the car, all the aluminum shavings that have accumulated. It seems like to me that the differential, the way it sits inside that case, kind of created a little like pocket where it kept some of that in there. So that brake clean wasn't working out as well as I would have hoped, so I came up with a bit of an idea here to fold up some paper towel, put it on a screwdriver, and get it pushed behind the gears and slide it out along the bottom of the case. This worked really well for me. I actually don't think I'll ever have to use this tactic again for anything. It's a pretty specialized kind of a technique, but it worked great. You can see all the aluminum coming out in the paper towel in this shot right here. After that, I moved to the bell housing side of the case. Same deal, picked out some of the bigger pieces with a standard screwdriver. These were a little bit easier to get to. And after that, switched to a shop vac of all things. Didn't think I'd ever have to be using a shop vac inside a transmission, but here we are. With some time and some patience, the shop vac worked surprisingly well. You can see in this shot right here how clean the transmission case actually got. After getting most of the aluminum out of the case, I switched over to prepping the gasket surface for reassembly. For me, that involves just using a straight razor to clean the bulk of the material off. Later on in the video, I'll use a Scotch-Brite pad to clean up the rest of it, but you can use whatever method works best for you. As you clean the old gasket material off the case, do the best that you can to keep the material from falling back into the case, and be very, very careful not to scratch the mating surface itself, as that's going to lead to leaks later on. So something kind of interesting here is I had a couple high spots on the case on the edge of the flange. Now, these could have been from the transmission being drug around on the floor, or it could have come from a junkyard. We're not really sure. It's got a lot of miles on it at this point. So I took a file and just knocked down some of the high spots. Now, you're probably not going to need to do this, but it's good to take a look at it, and if you're comfortable doing a procedure like this, then I suggest smoothing it out as best you can to avoid any leaks in the future. Alright guys, haven't done anything to this. This is exactly how I took it out of the car. Man, that is ugly. So, it still clears the gears, you know, the case doesn't touch anything on the inside. But what I think we're going to do, we're going to make this hole just a little bit bigger before we close it up. So there's a couple pieces missing here. Actually, let me just grab some channel locks and we'll just yank that off. The big thing we don't want is any more pieces to come off inside. So we want to take note of where it's thin. So like that is probably okay, but this guy is almost about ready to come off. So we are just going to yank it right out. I think. Just like that. So there we go. So there's the piece that had a bunch of fault lines on it. That was probably going to come off into the case after we repaired it. So I'm going to get this cleaned up and we'll see what it looks like. I got pretty well cleaned up. Most of the paint off. I hate it when people paint transmissions. So I'm going to kind of start mocking up a template. It's trying to decide how big we're going to make this thing. I want it to go past the joint or past the repair. I think you'd be doing fiberglass or something like that, but not too far where we got to deal with a bunch of really complex curves. So got a little cardboard here, and we're just going to kind of shape it out, see what we can do. This ain't rocket science. And there's a little bit of a, say, artistic interpretation going on. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. It'll work. Yeah. Thinking something just like that actually is about the right size. So that gives us a fair amount of coverage around the hole. So yeah, so I'm thinking to be about that size. Obviously we're gonna make it out of aluminum, so it's not really a big deal. But I think it's something like here. So I think I'm gonna use this to cut out a square, and then we'll get working on actually prepping the surface. We're gonna obviously clean it really well with some alcohol, and we're gonna figure out if we can put some fasteners in it or not. I actually think that the epoxy would probably do just fine if you clamped it down, but I like the idea that we put some fasteners in it too. So we'll take a look at the thickness of the case first. So with the aluminum blank cut out for the block-off plate, we're going to place it on the transmission and figure out where we need to do some modification to make it fit the contours of the case the best we can. So with a little time with a hammer and a vise, this is what we ended up with. Fits real well on the case, matches the contours pretty good, and after we determine where we're going to put the screws in here, we're going to transfer those marks directly to the transmission and drill some holes in the case. I used a shop vac while drilling the holes to pull as many chips out as I could. This worked pretty well for me to keep the transmission very, very clean. After I had the holes themselves drilled, I tapped them for some small Phillips button head screws. I ended up using a set of vice grips to turn the tap itself. I also used the shop vac method for this too to keep as many chips out of the transmission as I could. Worked great. After I had the holes drilled and tapped, I wanted to do a dry fit before I mixed up the epoxy. I specifically chose these small Phillips head screws due to their size, but also due to the fact that I wouldn't be able to put a whole lot of force onto them, which could lead to stripping out the holes in the transmission that we just made. These are really just to hold the plate on while the epoxy sets and aren't really there for strength. After getting the plate on there with the screws, I was sure glad that I ran a dry fit. I put the stub shaft back into the transmission and realized that the stub shaft itself ran into the screws on the inboard side of the plate. So since we're already this far down the road, I decided the best solution was just to drill 2 more holes in the case. After finally confirming that everything cleared, it was time to mix up the epoxy and get to it. The idea here was to get an inner sealing ring right around the actual hole itself. Nothing cosmic, nothing fancy. You can't really be too fancy with the old JB weld. After getting the inner sealing ring done, I did an outer ring. Basically, you know, better safe than sorry. Anything we can do to give the epoxy the best chance we can, we're gonna do. So, and this is gonna really help hold that panel on. Okay, take the plate and drop it on. I'm gonna place it on there and just kind of shimmy it down a little bit. Now I know where the bolt holes are, but you want to make sure that puppy's aligned before this thing starts to set. So get it close, get the screws started. Don't tighten them down until you get them all in there. Okay. And these are small, so we're not going to wrench on these real hard. It certainly has to be tight enough. What the hell is this one? Uh-oh. Don't know where that one is, so let's do this one. That was a little hard to find. Alright, here we go. We're tightening it down. Okay, looking pretty good, looking pretty good. Epoxy squeezing out the sides, that's what we want. Yeah, that's great. You can see right here, it's squeezing out along the edge. That means it's going to be sealed all the way back to the hole. So there's nowhere else for that epoxy to go. Up there in the corner. But we'll clean all this up before it sets all the way. Okay. Slowly going around tightening them as the epoxy starts to settle. So here she is, guys, in all its glory? Yeah, glory. I'll go for that. Alright guys, I want to take a quick minute to talk about why this case is so hard to split at the bell housing and the reason that it gets stuck and the reason why this is a little bit tricky. So this is the reverse idler arm. This is what actually allows you to put the car into reverse. So one side, this side right here, bolts onto the bell housing side of the transmission inside the transmission, and then the other side is engaging with componentry on the shift selector side. Or wherever your shift forks are, so whatever that side is called. So let me show you how it sits in here. There's a little hole in the arm right there that sits on the actual reverse selector arm, and then the bushing sits on the actual reverse gear. And so you can tell it's the reverse gear in the transmission because, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but it is the only gear that is straight cut. The gears are cut directly across the face of the gear, versus the other gears in a transmission in all manual transmission cars are helical cut. It keeps them really quiet, so that's why when you're in reverse, there's like a little bit of a whine. That's a straight cut gear. Race cars have straight cut gears. That's why their gearboxes are super loud. So this is the trick. It has to get bolted on. It has to fit on the shaft, the selector shaft here, and it has to fit in the gear when you're putting everything together. So my thinking is, here's how I think we're going to do this, is we're going to try and swivel this into place. We're going to put one bolt in, probably up here at the top on the case, and then we're going to start dropping everything together, and then we're going to try and swivel this thing onto the two pieces when we get close, and then we'll tighten this one in between the gap in the case. So then I might actually show you where it goes on the bell housing side before we get too far along. It sits right here. You can also see that there's a little tab that looks like it holds the actual output or input shaft bearing into place. So it kind of has a dual purpose, but you can see why this is going to be a little bit of a trick, because it has to get bolted securely to this and then also engage with the reverse gear. So after the epoxy has some time to dry, we're going to start getting ready to put this thing back together. So first, obviously, we're going to put the differential in, and then we're going to pick the case up over and kind of do a dry run for this as well. It's going to be a little bit of a complicated process, so we want to see what it's going to look like before we get going. All right, everyone, I fiddled with this for a while, made a couple changes to my tactic. I put the transmission in neutral, then I selected it down into reverse to try and get that arm where it really needed to be. So on this particular transmission, and honestly, I actually don't even know if this is reverse, but I pulled it out and then shifted it towards the bell housing. I think this is reverse on the MR2, but you know, don't quote me on that. Really, all I wanted to do was move that shift arm so I could get to it a little bit easier. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to film this from inside the case, but if we get the thing situated, I'm gonna try and get a shot of it. So let's give it a go. Woo! Okay, guys. You're zoomed way in, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. I know you can't see much here. So obviously these are the two halves of the case, and I'm going to shine a light in here. You're going to be able to see where the reverse idler arm is. See it up there? So that is the pin that you want to engage inside the transmission on the reverse selector shaft. And then over here, just barely see the bottom of the actual engagement pawl, I suppose you want to call it. So we're right in position here. All we have to do is swing this thing into place, and it's going to notch into that groove on the reverse gear, and we should be good to go. So we're going to get this set up and get those bolts started, and then make sure our edges are all clean, and then we're going to put that gasket maker in here, and then we're going to tighten this thing together. Sometime later, we finally got it. So we're not going to get this bolt in here. It's going to go directly through here. It's got to sit on top. So I think I can't get my hands in there, and I got small hands. So we're going to use some pliers. And just put that bolt. There it is. And we're just going to kind of feed it through. It's going to be a little bit of a trick, but we've made it this far. So I'd like to believe that we can do it. Now you don't want to drop it, certainly. There you go. There you go. Right in there. Make sure it's where it needs to be. That's kind of it. We're going to tighten that down, and then we're going to get this set up. So a couple of tools that I found really useful doing this. I got this snap-on pick my dad a long time ago. Real long screwdriver. And you're going to want something to prop up the case. I used just a pickle fork and a crowbar. Your mileage may vary. Use whatever you feel comfortable with. I can see why this is a real pain in the ass. This is really, it's not a lot of space, and you're dealing with gears that don't want to mesh together. There's a whole host of issues. So let's get this tightened up, and let's get ready to put that gasket maker on there. So just 12mm bolts. Obviously we can't get torque wrench in there, so we're just gonna tighten them up to where I think that they should be. I can't believe this actually worked, to be honest with you. Pretty impressed. It's funny, I've seen a lot of videos of people taking these apart at the bell housing, but I haven't seen many people putting them back together, and I'll be honest with you, I can see why not. There's not a whole lot I can show you in here. I am going to try and get a shot before we shut the case, just so you can see what it's supposed to look like once it's all together. You know, you can do a compare and contrast if you're doing the job yourself. Alright, let's get pretty good. Alright, this is about as good as it's going to get. You can see right inside there, that's the end of the shift arm, or the reverse idler arm. And right on the end of that, see if I can get a little screwdriver in there, a little pick. see that guy right there? That is what is in that shaft, what is in that groove on the gear. Here's the reverse gear right here. So that's it. It's in there. As the case comes down, the selector bushing will slide right inside, and we'll be good to go. So at this point, we're gonna get that gasket maker ready and start cleaning up the edge, and then we're gonna drop this case together. So after verifying everything is ready to go together, I started to put the gasket maker on the surface itself. So I'm using a Permatex product called the Right Stuff, which is something I saw recommended on a forum somewhere else as a replacement for this sealant. Worked pretty well, comes in a nice little can. Just take your time getting it on there. It's a little bit tricky because you're working through a really small gap, but if you pay attention to what you're doing and make a real serious face like I am here, you'll get along just fine. The BGB has a great diagram of where this sealant needs to go on the face, and again, that'll be linked down in the description, so I encourage you to check it out. It'll save you a lot of headache from chasing down leaks after you reassemble a transmission like this. So after getting all the sealant where it needed to be on the mating surface, I took a look around to just verify that the sealant bead was consistent, it was where it needed to be specifically, and everything was assembled correctly. Because once you drop this thing down, it goes right on. These are 22 foot-pounds. Something I saw somewhere is that you start at 19 and you work your way up. Don't know why, but that's what we're gonna do. So we're 15, 19, okay. Sounds like a good idea. Old Toyota bolts, old Toyota aluminum. Let's be as safe as we can, huh? We skipped one. We were on Brakes 22. Swapped over to the other ones. "21." Final pass at 22. And then we are done. So after getting the bolts all torqued up, we've got all the brackets and everything back on the transmission, and we're going to fill it with some fluid. You know, I'm just using some real inexpensive off-the-shelf, just some off-the-shelf STB stuff. You know, the idea with this is that we're going to run it for a little while with this fluid, and then we're going to drain it and then refill it with something decent. My hope is that we can sort of flush the rest of the remaining aluminum out of the transmission, which I'm sure there is some. So nothing cosmic, nothing expensive. So after getting the transmission full of fluid, you know, it's just time to put it back in the car. Now you can see in this shot, I did end up having to disconnect the driver's side subframe. It was just getting in the way and causing me some problems, and I figured it would be just faster just to remove it. Like with most transmissions that you're going to be doing on the ground in the garage, eventually you're just going to have to wrestle with it, which is what I had to do here. After getting the transmission back up in the engine bay, it's really just reversive removal. After getting all the work done underneath the car, it was time to remove it from the jack stands and put it on the ground. All right, finally got it all back together. You never really realize quite how many parts you take off these old MR2s until you start putting it all back together the way you found it. Gonna get the garage a little bit cleaned up. Everything is looking pretty good. I think I'm gonna take it for a little spin around the block and see how it shakes out. Alright, just a quick check-in at the end of the video here. I've put about 150 miles on the car since the repair. It's a mix of some highway driving, some city driving, some hard launches. Anything we could do to just sort of break some pieces loose if something's going to come loose. So I'm happy to report everything's staying together. It's great. No leaks, no fault lines on the epoxy, nothing. If you drove the car, you wouldn't know that it had previously had a giant hole in it. So I'd call that a win. Still, I understand this is a pretty unconventional repair. A lot of people will say that it should be welded, and I agree with them. It really should be welded. But you also have to take the entire gear pack out, which is a real pain, and some people don't have a welder. So this is a pretty good cold repair for the home mechanic. You know, it's important to remember that these cars are just getting a little older and parts are getting harder to find, and sometimes the simplest solutions are the best solutions. Don't overlook it just because it's not conventional wisdom. So I'll keep you updated on whether it leaks or anything goes wrong. But I'm feeling pretty good about the repair so far. So stay tuned for more videos. I'll be working on this MR2 off and on for a while. Most of the other stuff will be generally conventional. This was pretty out of the ordinary. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around the garage next time.